Today, something from the local kinder needs fixing. Well, this arrived home from the kinder this afternoon. It looks to be in need of some fixing. And from what I can make out, there's probably some form of birdhouse, or butterfly house, I guess. That'd be too small for birds to get in. So this has been out in the weather, obviously. It's just made of pine and a few light nails. I think there must have been some glue involved. There's a very lightweight plywood back on it. Very thin. It's 3-ply. Probably too thin for my liking. And there looks like a mounting screw or something. And so that's going to be fairly easy to replicate because that becomes a pattern. Then on the top here, I think we've got a gabled roof here made up of these two components. Now we've got worked out from the shadow lines here that the overhang at the front and at the side is probably something like this. Actually, couldn't have been. I had this worked out before. That must be the rear. Actually, that's this side. That's how that worked. So the rear comes up on the side like that, so we've got a bit of a mark here to guide us, and we've got an overhang at the bottom and an overhang at the front, so that goes on there. Let's put it down here to make it easy for ourselves. And this one must go similarly on that side and sit like that. Are they the same length? They are the same length, so that's going to look odd. It's going to look lopsided. Is that lopsided? And it actually is. That's really interesting. We might correct that because one of the problems here is these are all bowed, curved, and I'll be replacing these. So we'll actually make it even on both sides rather than that odd overhang on one side. So we've got to make a new roof. We'll probably refit these. The base doesn't look too bad, but we might run some glue into these joins, clean them up a bit, and run some glue into them. I don't know whether I have to fully disassemble. I don't really want to disassemble too much, but we'll get some glue in there. We'll squeeze the joints together with clamps, and we can get the new DeWalt clamp set onto it. And we'll need to select a piece of timber from out in the offcuts, a piece of simple 3-ply to replace that, but I'll use much thicker than this. That looks like it's only about 1.5, maybe 2 millimeters, which is unusual on something like this. Very lightweight. So that's the plan. Okay, we've been out to the wood pile and we've got a few ideas. This is just an old piece of pine, 50 years old or so. Came out of a house that I know was shelving from a house of about vintage of 50 years ago. I think that if we run through the recently tuned up bandsaw, we should be able to resaw that down to approximately the same width, and then we're replacing similar types of timber. Now, the alternative I have is to grab a piece of treated pine about that thick, maybe a little bit thicker. That's a fence paling that I've got out the back, but I don't want to cut into that if I can avoid it. And I'll just nice little exercise to resaw this and get rid of some paint and make 2 of these panels out of this. So that's that. The next piece is this back piece, and I discovered that I had this nice piece of looks like it was this top for a sliding top for a toy set box or something that was being thrown out, and I recovered it because it's a nice piece of pine. I've obviously used one section for another project, but this looks like it's going to fit on that section there quite nicely. So that'll be our pattern for taking that section out of there. Now it's nicely varnished. It's actually deteriorating, so I might use that as the insert. Oh, you never know. But this actually looks like a nice pine. So I wonder if it was from one of the European manufacturers. But anyway, never mind. It's that's the raw materials that we'll use for this needs fixing project. Right, well, we need to make 2 of these replacement roofs, and they're the same shape, but you mentioned the overhang that we had before. I'm not going to actually cut this one to size yet, because I don't know at the end the finished thickness of what I'm going to produce out of resawing this piece of wood. but they're basically square. There's a little knot here that I'd like to avoid. Other than that, this piece looks rather sound, and it's already well seasoned, so it's going to make a nice piece of timber. Let's grab a pencil and start marking this out, and we'll use the Starrett square. Should have pulled that over to the bench earlier. So let's just get our first line to avoid that knot, and we'll clear that knot reasonably comfortably. I'm just going to treat that top edge as our good edge. So we'll start there, we'll get ourselves a line. So there's our first line. I can see that clearly. Now, which way? We want the grain to go across again in the same orientation, so we'll design this to do that. It's the length that's the variable, so this width is going to be the same. So let's just throw ourselves a line in there. If we measure that, we get a round measurement? It's about 97, 98. So interesting. Well, we might do a rough cut first, so we'll get rid of that first, just so that we start working with this and we get a rough width, a rough length as well. So this will be, I'll just put a line on the outside there. That might make our life hard. Let's put a line right on the edge where we think we want to cut it off. I'll check for square. Yeah, I realise I should have squared that. Let's just use those as our outlines. So let's take all that off. We know we need to take this off, and we know we need to take, we'll come to that one next. We'll do a rough cut. Is there a nail in there? Just need to be careful of that. Looks like it could have been a nail. Any other nails? Looks like there was a nail there. There is a nail there, but that's in our offcut. So let's set ourselves up on the bandsaw for cutting that. Actually, before we do that, let's do some marking out on the other piece, and then we can set ourselves up on the bandsaw just one final time. Now I'm making an assumption here that this is completely accurate, but what I'll do is draw an outline that is going to be slightly oversized. We'll cut outside of the line, and that will give us enough clearance to trim this down once it's fitted, because it looks like the way this sits is that there's an exposed edge on every edge. Yes, so that we can trim that afterwards all the way around. All right, nice and easy. So over to the bandsaw for some simple cutting. So here we are in bandsaw land, and we just need to run a few of these rough cuts. We'll clean things up as we go through this process. So let's get these quick cuts made. That looks ready for some resawing. So we'll set ourselves up to resaw that. We might measure this cut and do that one accurately. I'm feeling like that's a crooked cut, so we'll just have a little close look at that with the square. If we're thinking that this is our reference edge, and we did that mark out from that reference edge, and that looks pretty good, we'll trim that later. But if we use the same reference edge and have a look at that cut, well, that looks pretty good as well. So maybe maybe I'm a little bit deceived by the angles, but I guess that looks pretty square. I guess that's square. So the next one is to measure this one. So we'll get the original. That's actually, that line actually fits my 10 centimeter mark here. I know it's not set up to be zeroed there, but it's right on that mark. So I reckon if I just line that, if I just take some measurements there, then we can actually just cut straight across while we're here at the bandsaw. So let's put our measurement in. I've got some parallax error from where I'm standing, but that's about right. And because of the nature of what it is, it doesn't need to be perfect. So that looks about right there. So let's get that line across there. See if we can extend this rule a little bit further. Now I'm not actually squaring the base here. I'm just drawing a line between the dots. Let's see how accurate it is anyway. It's not far out actually. I'm just going to do that. That'll give us a better line to make that cut. This bandsaw is performing very well after a tune-up. There's a little bit of a scraping on part of the blade, and I think it's a lower blade guide, and they're a pain to adjust on this bandsaw. I will adjust them, but not in this part of this project. We're only making small cuts. Next thing to cut out is our rough cut of our replacement back for the needs fixed birdhouse. So we're back at the mini workbench. I've just been having a little look at this butterfly house. It's not the best piece of construction, and just a few things that are going to probably get in our way as we try and put a new roof on it in particular. The geometry is a little bit odd. We've got sides that are effectively the same length, so I'm comfortable with that, but we actually have here, you can see that this gable, this side of the gable is 2 millimeters out and too high above this edge. So if the sides are actually at the same level, if we put a new piece of roof on there, we would see significant gap. So that's going to bother me. In fact, it's going to prevent us from probably running a bead of glue along there, which I'd like to do to help make this strong. It's probably not the most critical thing, because the back of the roof, front of the roof overhangs. Yes, the back of the roof is tied to the back plate, and a few brads will go back in. So it's not as critical, but you know what? We're perfectionists here at Proto 49. So let's run about 2 millimeters off here. Now the knife is in the drawer. We'll use this one, first knife that came out of the drawer. So I'm just going to run a scorer line here, lightly first. And that'll give me a mark to probably plane to. I don't think I could try. I could do it. No, I don't think I'll do it in the bandsaw. I could do it in the bandsaw. I could take the whole thing apart. I don't really want to do that. I really am just going to run some sandpaper on those inside those joins there. Some fairly coarse. I've got an old piece of 800 here that's been used for a dozen jobs, but we'll just do a little bit of cleaning. This is a trick from the luthiers that do repairs, where they need to glue up, but they don't want to take things apart, like it might be a crack in the top of a guitar. But you do need to get a bit of cleaning with a bit of sandpaper in there before you actually start gluing. And this is very old, quite old used sandpaper, but it's ample for the task. All right. So that's one side. Let's see if I can get it into the other side. Might not go as far through this one. Doesn't look as bad. Yeah, it's not going to. It's coming in a little. Just catching. Probably just a tiny effect there. But let's try it again from the other side. Oh, that's good. That'll be enough. Dirt and grime everywhere from this little one. So before we force some glue into there and attempt to glue that up, I need to remove these old brads. So the pincers, I wonder if that's the whole length of that brad. I will find out as we remove others. These little pincer pliers have been, yeah, they're all the same length. That's handy. Nice. So we just get rid of all these brads. And I'm actually going to surface this whole face here. There's still some leftover veneer of ply that on some sections still glued on, and this one sticks forward of the sides, so I'll just plane that off as well. So I definitely need to get rid of all these brads. I don't think there's a brad in there. I've only removed 5 so far. 6. Now while we're here, let's get the one out of the top. that was a long one. Nothing else. Alright, let's carefully check in there whether there actually is a brad. This is an old rusty blade. No, I think he's come out. Just run this along top just in case that's going to get under those. Yes, close. So, whittling that's going to be almost as good as planing it. Close to level. But of course we will get the block plane out, go over it. That block plane's actually set for a fairly fine cut, so that's just quite nice. It's amazing, I haven't sharpened this plane for a long time, it just keeps going. Just must have a great blade in it. It really does need sharpening, I can feel it as an issue, but for this job we're not doing precision, just running the back of the plane on that edge to get a parallel across, particularly around the corner, and then we'll process around, move around to get the same off the other side, and that should give us a nice gluing surface. Now admittedly I probably should have done that after squeezing all that together, but let's get some glue into some of these joins. I might run some glue into the bottom connection there as well. Yes, definitely. Alright, so now the glue that I've got I think is exterior rated. I'll just check that. Doesn't actually say specifically, in fact it probably isn't. But this never had glue in the first place, it was just held by the fasteners. So we'll put enough fasteners in it to repeat that mechanical strength and use this glue, because I don't have any of the other glue at the moment. Okay, we'll just get a little bit of glue into those grooves. And I'll work that in from the outside. We'll work it in a little bit with our fingers once we get some lying around as well. Pull that side open, get it in there, that's good. I'll clean that up in a minute. So this side, got some glue in there. Now tap the other side. Working a good amount down into the crack. So working that down by running it past the edge of the crack, and it just forces it in. Alright, that's going to be heaps. As we squeeze it together it'll all come out again. I'm not going to do anything special on the inside in terms of running the glue. Now, a little wipe of the hands. Did have some paper towel here, but I'll wash off in water. I'm going to try out the DeWalt clamps again. I think what I'll do is just glue it down to the bench, which might make a mess on the bench, but that's okay, we can cope with that. So again, I've got to slide these clamps around a bit differently to how I'm used to with my other clamps, to open and close them. That's hilarious. I can't even use a clamp. Now let's clamp that on there. I've got a good amount of squeeze out already happening. I'll put a diagonally opposite one here. Plenty of squeeze out happening there. These ones are a bit longer. That same reach from the ends. Look at that, I used that as if it was natural. I need to grab some of that squeeze out as I can before it drips onto my bench. Yes, somewhere on the bench. Need something across the end there, we'll work that out. Grab that squeeze out, put it onto the old roof. And I'm just going to put a clamp across the bottom. You probably might not see that on the camera angle that we've got here. Got a bit of glue on the bench there in this corner, so I'm going to try and get that out with an offcut. Ah, yeah, that worked. Okay, and a clamp for across the back. We'll use one of the old cheapies. It's going to be a problem because of the DeWalt. It's still going to be a problem on that side, which I should have known. Probably, yeah, probably this one. It's lost its grips. If anyone knows where to get these grips to replace. Anyway, I'm just out of camera, I think, but just putting that across the bottom to hold the bottom together. Okay, nicely glued up, nicely clamped up. Great. Okay, back to bandsaw land. Let's set ourselves up for this resaw. Now we need two things to resaw, at least two things. Now firstly is the fence, so we'll bring that into play. We need to lift the blade guides up. We probably need to lift them up at least as high as the cut we're making, and maybe just a smidge higher. Turn those off. And then we need to set our width. Now I'm going to probably set this with an offcut, but we're very close at that. Ah, yeah, always happens. Squeeze down the clamp and it shifts. Let me just get the off and off cut. Is it the same width? No, it's not the same width. An off cut, or the off cut, an off cut. It's a different piece of wood. We use the big one. And yeah, that'll fit. So I'll just run this in and just see whether we're in the middle. Now one thing I did wrong there is I should have checked whether there are any nails in that end, because remember there was a piece of wood that had nails at one stage. Now, how are we for centre? I'm actually feeling reasonably good about that centre. It's maybe a little bit too far away from the blade. So I'm just tapped it across ever so slightly. Probably get a little bit out of that. No. Get a little bit out of that. No. It's a shame. We're going to have to cut the same spot. I'm going to try that. See if the blade stays straight. think that's going to work if we're careful. Got the same orientation piece. So, see how we go. Here's one thing to consider. We could increase this blade speed and see if that makes any difference to the way it's cutting. I like where it's cutting, I just don't like the way it's cutting. So we've just changed gear to the fast speed, which is the speed for cutting timber. Let's see if it works better. Now to me that looks like a pretty good resaw. We're a little bit off centre on the back side, you can see a bit of a curve there, but that's actually pretty good. I mean, for the purpose it's really good. So there's our resaw. We might do a little bit of planing just to smooth that, but that is potentially the underside anyway, so I might not even touch it. But I'll just maybe thickness that last little piece that's just a little bit thicker over there. You can see on that that corner over there. So we might just pay a little attention to that, but apart from that, it's a great little result. I need to fine tune my my resawing, but using that faster speed, the speed that is recommended for normally for timber, it seemed to work quite well. Okay, last thing we need to do while we're over the bandsaw is a little cut to help us fit our roof together. Now the roof's going to go together like this, but this piece I'll cut the length off, so that needs to be cut off at the width of this piece here. So let's just line it up this way, give ourselves a line on the inside there because it's nice and clean. Now that pencil is not very sharp at all, so I'll get out the trusty pencil sharpener. I'll do it over the bin, or a tray at least. Give ourselves half a chance of getting a line in the right spot with a sharp pencil. Alright, the line's right down in there now, that's good. Okay, so that's our excess that we want to get rid of. So let's just do that now. Pencil away, that piece can rest there while we cut this off. One of the reasons why I use the lower speed on the bandsaw, two reasons. One is it gets a bit of vibration up. There's a harmonic vibration, I think, that hits in at about the speed of the high speed. The other reason is it actually doesn't throw as much dust around on the lower speed, and if I can get away with cuts on the lower speed, then I will. Obviously that resaw needed the higher speed. It seemed to work quite well at the higher speed, but a little cut like this, I could have run it down to the lower speed just to make it easier, quieter, smoother, and less dust. We've got our two sides cut to length. This one will now come out underneath. We could clean up some of that, but that's basically our new roof. So we're just using Old Faithful Black & Decker antique heat gun here. Don't know the vintage of this paint on here, but just don't want to have that paint on there in the first place from the look of it, but I think it's wise to remove the paint. And I realised before when I suggested I might use treated pine as a backup, if this is going into a kindergarten context, we just can't use treated pine, even just for a roof of a little butterfly house. So we'll use this, this really nice pine. I assume it's radiata pine. Just scrape that. Yeah, that's going to come off easily as I hit it, so that's good. I think this new wood timber that I put on, I'll seal with a coat of shellac or two. I've got some shellac sitting there that needs to be used up, so we'll use the shellac. I won't give the whole thing a sand, and even after the shellac, even put a clear coat. But I'm still tossing up about whether that's a good idea. Okay, most of that paint's coming off in the first scrape. This is an old blade off a plane. In fact, there was a new one a while ago, but it got used for all sorts of jobs like this. And in front of that gun is really quite warm, so we've got to be careful here. That paint's coming off beautifully, so I'm very happy about that. Didn't want to sand it off. Didn't want to make any dust of it. Boy, don't get your fingers near this heat gun. Maybe I should have my welding gloves on. Okay, probably warm enough. It's better. The little lights come back up when the heat gun gets turned off. It's pretty warm. It's a pretty powerful little device. That blade's pretty warm as well. That piece of timber's pretty warm. Alright, the last of the scraping there looks good. That certainly removed all of the paint that I was worried about. A little bit there I might need to just sand off just to get the last with a very coarse sandpaper. I wouldn't put any fine sandpaper. Now we have introduced a bit of a twist into the piece of wood now, so I might heat it from the outside, from the opposite side, to bow it back. We'll get rid of some of these flakes of paint. Put the heat gun back on and bow it back. Something about this heat gun that needs fixing. Alright, it's quite warm. What I'm going to do is just put that in the vise to hold it straight. Just holds it as it cools down. Okay, next thing is to get these clamps off here. I'll give them a little bit more time to dry, although there's been a fair bit of heat on there just now, none on the other side. Actually, that's really warm. Let's do that. Okay, it shoots way to dry the glue. Alright, I'll disclamp that, let that cool down there, take these clamps off. Looking quite good. I'm very happy about the way this has come up so far. And getting to know these dual clamps a little bit better. These are branded DeWalt. I'm sure they're made. I haven't seen exactly the same style used for other brands like Irwin and then in various cheaper brands. But so maybe they are specific to DeWalt. I'll give them credit for that for the time being until I see a copy. All right, now we had almost glued that down to the bench. Some residual glue on the bench, but woodworking bench, you've got to expect that every now and then. I think a lot of it's dirt actually. Okay. All right, that looks really good. Very happy with that. I'll give the light scrape. I like to keep most of the patina of this rather than make it look like something that's new. I think I might get the block plane onto that a little bit more and take that corner off because it's a bit high. In fact, the whole side, this side's higher than that side. But again, it's not going to matter. It's not precision cabinetry that we're dealing with here. It's just got to be smooth enough to get a nice piece of plywood, speaking of which, to sit on there comfortably. I think that's going to be fine. Alright, that's that. Where's our new... Well, I decided that this is a cut I can achieve on the bandsaw without much risk, because I can just put that through here. So let's give it a go. Much better. Let's look down from the top. It's a little bit rough, but there's nothing we can't fix up with a piece of sandpaper. Here we are back at the mini workbench, and we're back to our old scrappy piece of 80 grit sandpaper. Bit of a lump there, so let's just work on that with the block plane, which I've put down out of reach. Maybe we'll try the other one of the other block planes. Which is not as well set up. Definitely not sharp. Can't see what I've done with it. Well, that might have done it. As I reach for the square, I can see the block plane over there on the side. All right, that's good enough. And two. We'll have a little bit of think about this. And that piece of ingrain's unfortunately or fortunately going to be at the top, and that's going to be at the bottom. I think if we put that there, then we'll be very happy with that outcome. A little bit of clean up on this piece of timber with that sandpaper, and I may put it this way. And then that will be good. That will be good. Now there's a bit of extra here. That's fine. I'll trim that once we've fitted the roof, but that's looking good. I think the best way to go about putting this on is probably to glue it in place. And to do that, I think I will use 5-minute epoxy. So let's get a little bit of sanding on this with coarse sandpaper, which I put over here, just to I think the best technique is 5-minute epoxy for this. And we won't put a lot on because we will also put mechanical fasteners, nails, in as well. So let's mix up some 5-minute epoxy. Maybe the old roof piece can be our mixing tray. And the 5-minute is in the drawer. We'll just squeeze out a little bit on here. Got a nail sticking out, we don't need that, do we? I think I put the pincers away. Let's take the other piece. It's got a nail sticking up here. I normally wear gloves with 5-minute epoxy, not that it's dangerous, but just because it gets all over the place on your fingers, the hardener and the, I've already got a little bit now and it's just tacky. So that's one of the reasons why I keep it in this bag, so it doesn't interfere with everything else in the drawer. Stirring stick. That one looks good. Now, as I say with epoxies, the more you mix them, the better. So I often am too quick with 5-minute epoxies, and then that means they take 10 minutes to cure. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time here mixing and trying to combine everything as best I can, drawing it all into the centre. Going with colour a bit because there's a bit of dirt on the surface. Alrighty, that's the top face, this is the face I'm gluing. Let's seal that because that's the piece that's going to be exposed to nature. So we'll just seal the end grain with our 5-minute epoxy, a very thin coat just to seal it. The shellac would have done probably a perfectly adequate job, and I still will put the shellac on, but look, oh actually I'm going to trim that edge anyway, aren't I? So a lot of that will disappear. The rest of it along here and here. We actually don't need a lot of this on here. I don't know whether it will or not, but it will just dabble, makes sense, but it will dab a little bit there and on there. I also will do, let's put a piece of tape down on the bench at the apex of the gable, top of the gable maybe. If I can get into this. And packing tape, cheaper packing tape, the worst. Well, there we go. Well, that's one of the simplest glue ups I've done in a long time. This might just get in there. Now, is there a way of clamping that? Do you know what? I'm not sure there is. I might just hold it. Alright, I think that's dried up. It's a little bit tacky. Got a little bit of a gap there. We might run some wood glue in that gap. I'm definitely going to run some wood glue in those gaps. So let's do that now. just a blob basically. The question is why, and the answer is, well, because we can. Can't even get there with my little stick. Now while it's doing that, it's not going to matter that piece because that's going to have some timber on the outside to a point. While that's doing that, we'll set ourselves up for putting this rear cover on. That involves setting ourselves up with some glue. I'm going to use mechanical fasteners mostly on this. Staples actually, we'll talk about that in a second. I've just scraped around the edge this old. I'm going to use this on the inside. It's not that good, the varnish, it's cracking, so I may as well just use the clean side on the outside and put a good coat of shellac on there. So I'll just place that on there relatively evenly. Definitely in good stead. That's interesting. Definitely covering the centre. Might roll that over and just place it on its back. Put a little bit of weight on it. Speaking of weight, 5 kilos. Might be too much. Let's put something across there. Just want to keep all that together for the time being until I put the staples in. I might clamp, actually I don't need to, because the back's straight. A little bit of trimming here that I'll need to do, but I think we're looking pretty good. In fact, I will leave that to glue up a little bit more, and then I'll come back, I'll get out the stapler, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, here's our stapler. It's an electric stapler. Roberts Electric Tacker 10781. Do you know what? This, I had a lot of trouble. I couldn't find anything on the Roberts website about this. They still make a modern version of these. This is a tacker, which I think it's used in the carpet industry or in industries where they're tacking very thin plywoods onto it, like a backing on this, exactly this situation, or even material coverings, you know, like awnings and things like that. It took me a while to find the compatible staplers for this particular one, but these are a 690 series stapler, and in this case they're 8mm long, but the 690 series are not very common. You can get 690s. I was trying to get them in the 12 because that's the maximum size that this takes, but none of the suppliers that I could find had 690s in a 12. So I had to get the 8s, which means it's not that good for anything above 4 or 5mm plywood, or 3 actually. And I've got, I think it's 3mm plywood I'm using here for the new back, so it should be fine. And I'll put quite a few of these in. So there's the shape of the staples. There they are there. They look a bit like normal staples, they're just skinnier. So I've already got some in the gun. It's a powered gun, so we'll need to plug that in. And I'll flip this over after a little bit more drying time. And this crazy little box I made out of some leftover parts of I think that's a caravan roof panel, and the timber is actually the leg off an old table that used to be outside. So let's plug this stapler in and get ourselves set up for rapid fire stapling. Now, there's a few funny angles here. We need to just hold this together up the top here a bit better. So I'm going to just, it's got the brake on. think that's the way it works. Yes. I'm going to put one in about every inch along here, all the way around. This thing's not coming off. That'll help hold the roof on. Now they're obviously a little bit proud. It is set to the maximum, and it's one of the reasons I think this stapler was discarded by its original user. But it's certainly working fine for me. I've got an overhang there. I just need to be careful of overhang. I'm enjoying this stapler. Always a little envious of those guys in their workshops with their air tools, and they're just ting 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 ting. But I actually see why they like using those air tools. I'll just scrape a little bit of that excess glue out of there, even right up to there. And similarly, oh, that seam hasn't got any. Probably come out on the inside. Get the excess there, otherwise we'll be trying to clean up that as an offcut. I'll squeeze some of that down into there. There is a gap there that did open up, so however careful you are, sometimes gaps do open up. In fact, what I'm going to do, as soon as we have to wait for some glue drying time, I'm going to run a little bit more wood glue down in that gap. I don't like gaps. If I can fill them at the time of construction, then that's not a bad idea. And this is not a high art piece of work, and I possibly will be taking some of that off anyway, so alright, you've got to be happy with that. Well, I am anyway. So we're almost there. A bit of trimming of this component and a bit of tapping down of those heads, which I'll go and get a hammer, and we'll do that in a second. Now this might be the day where the mini workbench cops a little bit of a shellacking. I'll try not to get too much on the workbench. I don't really want to shellac the workbench, but let's put a coat on the bird house or butterfly house. Got to be careful, and I'm just rubbing it on. It's the most effective way of putting shellac on anything, I believe. So we'll just get a fair bit of shellac on some of this end grain. Oh, dropped on the workbench, so there we go. I like a thick coat. Alright, so I'll go over the whole surface and come back shortly. Okay, well that's our little butterfly house now fixed with a coat of shellac. That'll dry off hopefully with a little bit lighter a tone. It looks like it did have a a sealer on it of some form, slight white or grey colour. But anyway, that's our finished butterfly house. Let's hope they're happy with it at the kindergarten.